Hey you guys, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you are returning. Today I want to talk about triggers. And specifically I want to talk about how we can deal with our triggers and what these are when it comes to manifesting. And most importantly, how we can stop being triggered by our old stories so we can finally manifest what we want. If you are new here, hi, I'm Missy Renee. I'm a mindset and manifestation coach, and this channel is all about helping you manifest anything that you want in your reality. So if manifestation and conscious creation are topics that you are interested in learning more about, then definitely don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And if you enjoy my content and want to help my channel, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button. If you are interested in any of my resources, such as one-on-one coaching, my workshops and courses, or my new coaching program, I'll have links to all of that down in the description box below, so don't forget to check that out. And this video may be one of the most important videos I've made to date, because it's one of those things that virtually everybody struggles with at some point or another on this journey, and that is triggers. What do we do when we're dealing with a strong emotional reaction to that old story? It's something that time and time again gets us tripped up, throws us off course, and kills any potential momentum that we have been building. But triggers also have an important function. And if we can learn to know what that is, and if we can begin to take a different approach with how we treat these triggers, or these reactions that we have to the old story, it can actually come out to be in our benefit when these things come up for us. It is certainly one less thing that we have to fear, and that is, at the end of the day, what we are aiming to overcome is all of that fear. So if you have been battling a lot of triggers and a lot of reactions to that old story in your 3D circumstances, if this is something that you have been trying to overcome, then you're definitely going to want to stick around through the end of the video, because I'm going to go into detail as to what these things are, what they mean, and ultimately how we can overcome them and eradicate them for good. But before we can talk about getting rid of our triggers and overcoming them, we first need to have an understanding of what these are and what they mean, so we can begin to stop being so fearful of them. Because our fears to our triggers become limitations in and of themselves. And what I mean by that is, if we do have a strong emotional reaction to something that was unwanted or something relating to that old story, we tend to get very fearful, and we wind up fueling this fire that we didn't even want to light in the first place. Because when it comes to manifestation, we understand at the very least that we don't want to be entertaining things that we don't want. We don't want to give our focus and attention to the undesirable outcomes or the 3D circumstance. So when we react to that 3D circumstance that we don't desire, it can be scary, because then, oh no, we've created more of it, or we're planting fresh new seeds of that same old unwanted story. And this can become an awful feedback loop until we learn to break it. And for a lot of people, this winds up being a really terrible feedback loop. But here's the thing about triggers, and this is number one and most important. We do not need to fear them, because these emotional reactions that we have, just like with the 3D circumstances outside of us, are only gauges showing us where we are. And what I mean by that is, when we have an emotional response to something, we have a reaction, it's an indication that there's still a degree of attachment to that story or that circumstance. In a sense, our reactions and how we are triggered show us what we are still entertaining. So this answers a very fundamental question that most people have, and that is, how do I know if I am actually living in the end or not? How do I know if I am maintaining that state of the wish fulfilled, or if I'm even doing any of this right? Well, the most simple way to know is based on your reactions. If we're having any kind of reaction to something, then it is clear indication that there is still attachment there, or that we still have faith in that old story or that circumstance. There is still a bond there that we have not yet been able to separate ourselves or detach from. And there are millions of examples in our lives of ways that we do this. You can look through the course of your life and see that you probably don't have the same reactions to things now that perhaps you did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, etc. Because your views, your beliefs, and your assumptions have likely shifted and changed even a little bit over the years. One clear example is about money. If you are somebody that has struggled when it comes to money and finances, then having a lot of bills coming up or an unexpected emergency come up is going to provoke a certain kind of reaction from you. But if you were somebody that was financially abundant, if you are in fact living in a state of wealth and you have that peace of mind and security, then anything that comes up for you out of the blue is not going to be a big deal. You're not going to have any kind of reaction to it because you're not attached to the idea that I'm lacking something here or that I don't have the means to change this or fix this. And that is sort of at the core of why we become so reactive in certain situations and circumstances, because it feels like we don't have the power to do anything about this. And this is something that is affecting me greatly. If it feels like there is a circumstance outside of us that is outside of our control, then that is typically where we get emotionally charged. So I say all this to say that our reactions actually serve a purpose here, and they can actually be really useful to us if we are mindful. Because to put it quite simply, if you are reacting to something, if you are having an emotional reaction to an instance, a circumstance, or a feeling or thought that you have, it's because there's still attachment to it. So that being the case, if there's still an attachment to it, then we know at the very least, that we're not living in the end, are we? And at least that can give you clarity as to what you need to do going forward. And I cannot stress the importance of understanding this. We don't need to fear our reactions. It is not the reaction itself necessarily that is creating the new manifestation. And this is something that is incredibly important to understand, because if we can begin to really observe and pay attention to our reactions and our triggers, so to speak, we can stop looking at this thing or this reaction like an enemy or something to be fearful of. We can, at the very least, say, okay, this has given me clarity as to aspects and things that I need to focus on, and specifically what I need to begin imagining against. If I am reacting negatively to this 3D circumstance that I don't want and I don't like, then there is still considerable bond here to that state of consciousness. So that gives me the understanding that I need to persist in my imaginal acts until I can begin to see a change in my reactions. And this may sound kind of simple and obvious to people, but it is quite amazing how much of this gets overlooked. When we have a negative reaction, we tend to either try to just suppress it, shove it under the rug, or doom spiral with it. And it goes without saying that none of these are an approach we want to take. So this really comes down to a change in perspective and how we're looking at this and how we are observing our reactions. And yes, they are something that we want to observe. These aren't things that we want to ignore. We can come back and revise them later, but initially, after we have reacted, we want to take that as the thing that it is. And what it is indication that we still have a lot of faith in that old story. Because here's the thing, it can be a lot more simple to really get into this idea of the wish fulfilled when you are relaxed, when you are in a fairly good place, you're in a fairly good mood, and imagining this thing that you want, this state that you want to occupy, this place you want to embody. But when it comes down to it, and you are faced with a 3D that's showing you the opposite, that is where it truly matters. That is where it really becomes apparent what state you are occupying more often than not. The true practice here lies in what you do in the face of a challenge. These reactions that you have show you in no uncertain terms what you actually believe in. And if this is the case, well, okay, at least we have clarity here. all right, so we understand what triggers are and where they actually are very important and what we need to pay attention to, but how do we ultimately overcome them? How do we ultimately get to the point where we're no longer having these triggers or these kinds of reactions? The answer to that lies in the most powerful tool that you have, and you already know what I'm going to say, it's your imagination. Through imagination, by imagining yourself as the person that you desire to be and persisting with those imaginal acts, this is how you ultimately step into that new state and really begin to objectify it. This is how you embody it. And you're going to find at the appointed hour that what you were reacting to before, whatever circumstances brought up a trigger in you, are no longer having the same effect. And it's here in these moments that you can see, again, without a shadow of a doubt, that you are in fact embodying the state of the wish fulfilled. So let's say that I am trying to manifest a specific person. And let's say I've been at this for a couple of months. And when I first started, in the first initial weeks, I was constantly checking social media. I was constantly looking at my phone, waiting for a text to come through. I was battling thoughts in my mind constantly about what they were doing, if this was working, if they were thinking about me, if they were with somebody else. All of these indicators, all of these triggers and reactions, in that time, I'm still very much living in that old state, in that undesirable state of consciousness, and that old story. But as I continue to persist in my imaginal acts, I'm going to notice that less and less I am responsive to these old stories. I'm less responsive to these old triggers and these old seeds that I had planted from that old state, until I get to a point where I am not reacting to 3D circumstances anymore. Perhaps he sends me a text one day and I get excited, and then we talk for a few hours and then it trails off and I don't hear from him for 24 hours after that. In my old state of consciousness, the way that I would have responded would have been to panic and to get upset and to feel rejected and to feel abandoned. But from this new state that I had been putting myself in my imagination, and I had begun to occupy this place of being in that loving and committed relationship, I'm not having the same response to that 3D aspect. Whatever the circumstance might be, I am no longer reacting to it and giving it that emotional charge because I am no longer attached to that state. And this is all a trigger is. It is an indication of your attachment, and specifically our attachment to our beliefs, attachment to our assumptions about this other person, about ourselves, about the whole world at large around us. But you know, based on your reactions, which state you are actually occupying. And if you are spending enough time in that new state, you're going to notice a change in response. You're going to notice a change in your reactions. That is the entire premise of all of this. So at the end of the day, we need to begin to look at our triggers and our reactions not as foes and not as something to be scared of, but as gauges and indicators as to where we are in consciousness. Which state are we still holding attachment to? Are we still attached to this old story and these old circumstances? Or are we in fact beginning to detach or disassociate ourselves from all of the unwanted and undesirable outcomes? Are we still feeding this old story or not? That really is all it is. And if we can begin to start really taking an objectifying look at our reactions instead of being fearful of them, this is going to give you a ton of crucial information here. Because ultimately, the reaction is just that. It's just an indicator. It is only feedback to what state you are occupying and identifying with. And once we begin to look at these more objectively, we begin to distance ourselves from them. And ultimately, all we need to do when it comes to overcoming these triggers and these reactions is to utilize the imagination. We need to persist in our imaginal acts. We need to persist in knowing that what we imagine is ultimately what we embody and what we experience. This has worked for literally everything our entire lives. This is no different. The more that we can begin to imagine ourselves as the person that we desire to be, living the circumstances that we desire to experience, we become more and more attached to that new desirable outcome, to the point where we're not reacting to this old story anymore. Even if it does show up in our 3D, even if the circumstances do show up that's not in our favor, it's not going to ultimately matter. Because again, if you have no attachment or no faith in a certain outcome, because again, the only time you're going to react that emotionally charged to something is if there's a lot of faith and a lot of identification with it. So if I embody the state of consciousness where my specific person and I are already back together, we're already married in a loving, committed relationship, then I'm not going to budge when something happens on the outside contrary to that. I'm not going to be fazed or moved too much one way or the other. So begin to look at your reactions as feedback. They are just feedback. They're your creation, just like the 3D circumstance. And just how we created that circumstance and the feedback that followed, we can change it as well. So we use our imagination and we imagine ourselves as the person that we want to be, and we commit to that. We persist with that. We do not let the outside circumstances faze us. And if we do have an emotional reaction, we take note of that, the indication that, okay, there's still attachment here. I'm going to continue to imagine, because clearly I'm not quite living in the end just yet. I'm not yet subscribing to that idea of my wish fulfilled. But inevitably, by continuing to imagine yourself as the person that you desire to be, you will notice a change in your reactions and how you feel in your day-to-day. Because your imagination is your power. That is how you create or uncreate anything in your world. If you change your imaginal acts, you will change the reaction. You will change that response. And that is ultimately, at the very core, how you manifest anything that you want. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Also, if you are interested in any of my resources, I have links below to my one-on-one coaching, my blog, my social channels, my podcast, my workshops and courses, all that good stuff. Got a ton of links for you down in that description box, so don't forget to check that out. Also, do not forget to check out the other videos on this channel. Don't forget to check out my Manifestation Fundamentals playlist. Each video is a different topic, but it all pertains in how to manifest the best life ever. So until we meet again, you guys, as always, take care, be well, and never forget how powerful you truly are. Happy manifesting, guys.